So I'm going to talk a little bit about transformation, and specifically, they asked me to talk a little bit about what not to do. So we've had a lot of motivation and getting fired up about loving Houston, about getting out there and serving the Lord. And if you're here, I believe you're motivated. I'm going to talk a little bit about what not to do. But I wanted to share a little bit just about me so you kind of know where I'm coming from. I was born and raised here in Houston, Texas. I grew up very close here to this neighborhood. Went to school at Second Baptist right over there. My wife grew up going to church here. And I went to a little Baptist church called West University Baptist. And there, my life was totally transformed by the ministry of a man named John Berryhill. I grew up a youth, like a lot of youth in your churches, and he took my faith from a childhood faith to a vibrant, engaged relationship with Christ, an adult faith. This man took us on mission trips to Mexico every summer, where I learned to share the gospel. I was encouraged, I was challenged to reach out to people that were different than me. We would take trips to Fifth Ward, to Kelly Courts. I went down and served alongside Mildred McWhorter in the Baptist Mission Centers at Gano, Joy, and Fletcher. And I remember very vividly this truckload of potatoes. Just they opened the back gate and they started tumbling out like potatoes do. And we bagged them up for the needy. I was a young child at that time. So I was deeply moved and impacted. And that witness of that church and those Sunday school teachers, those pastors, specifically John Berryhill, pushed me into and really inspired me into the ministry that we have today, where my wife and I live in the Third Ward with our 4 children, raising our children there and being a part of the community. And so if you're here today, part of a church that does vacation Bible schools for your kids in the summers, and you have faithful grandmothers that continue to do the 1st and 2nd grade and 3rd grade Sunday school class, and you run an upward basketball program or you do something like that, I stand today, if there's anything good in my life, I stand today as a testimony to what that work does. And so I'm grateful to you for your faithful service, no matter where you are, because it's what is pushing our youth to serve the Lord as adults. So you're doing great work, and I appreciate that. And so you've come today and you're excited about how can we go further? How can we be a part of transforming our city? And I want to share a little bit. Oh, I've got one other picture. Oh, this is John Berryhill, man, and that was my wedding day, and he performed our wedding ceremony on that day, almost 11 years ago now. I want to share a parable that I heard to kind of kick us off. It's the parable of mouse and elephant. All right, that's what it says. I heard this 6 years ago at a conference in Miami. Let me tell you a story about missions, an African Christian friend said to me. Elephant and mouse were best friends. One day, elephant said, "Mouse, let's have a party." Animals gathered from far and near. They ate, they drank, they sang, and they danced. And nobody celebrated more or danced harder than elephant. After the party was over, elephant exclaimed, "Mouse, did you ever go to such a party? Have you ever seen something like this? What a blast." But mouse did not answer. "Mouse, where are you?" elephant called. He looked around for his friend and then shrank back in horror. There at elephant's feet lay mouse. His little body was ground into the dirt. He had been smashed by the big feet of his exuberant friend elephant. Sometimes that is what it is like to do missions with people in positions of power, high status, or authority, the African storyteller commented. It's like dancing with an elephant. When I first heard that parable, I was a little taken aback, and I got a little defensive. I knew I was one of the elephants, one of those with resources, and I just thought, you got to be kidding me. Like I went on these mission trips. We fasted. We prayed. I fasted starting in the 6th grade for these things. And we would drive down to Reynosa, right on the border of Mexico and Texas. I remember very vividly praying for this youth pastor in Donna, Texas, because he was running youth ministry, pastoring the church, and had a second job. And I thought, is all of that wrong? I went with such good intentions. I had such a good heart. And I thought, gosh, but we make all these sacrifices. What's going on? Why is this a bad thing? And I don't know if you felt that way when you hear that, but I started thinking about elephants in our ministry. I thought about, what are elephants? Well, they're the resourced ones. Elephants are big relative to the mice. There's no bad intentions there. Elephant in the parable, no bad intentions. Wanted to have a party with mouse. And they're friends with mice. So how can we as elephants in ministry do it without trampling our friends? How can we dance in such a way that is beneficial to everyone involved? And that's what I want to explore today. I had my own kind of elephant experience, probably the most poignant ministry experience that I had. Before I moved to the Third Ward, I was in Bolivia. And we did a carpentry training program and discipleship with young men, trying to do the spiritual work of the gospel and also the physical work of the gospel. Jesus Christ did both. And how could we do that? We partnered with this carpenter, and we learned about the gospel and how that works itself into your life as a man. And Luis, he was one of the guys, and I was very taken with Luis. He was my next door neighbor, and I really wanted to see him take a front page step in ministry. I wanted this guy to be the next great youth pastor there in this tiny little town called San Ignacio. And so as he was, as we were talking about this, and I'm holding him very accountable to his attendance at the discipleship program, about his relationship with girls, I'm really on him about this. And finally, Luis says to me, he says, "Kirk, you know, I feel like you just are interested in me as a project. I feel like you just want to tell a story back to your friends at home about how you really helped somebody. I don't know if you really care about me." And I was shaken to the core. I was passionate. I was dancing. I wanted this guy to be the best he could be. I wanted him to follow Christ. I wanted him to have everything that the abundant life means for this young man. And he asked me that gut level question. I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to come back to Luis's story. But in our ministries to the poor especially, what's the goal? We're planning for our Agape Development Ministries. We work in the Third Ward. We have lots of different programs. We have programs for children, for youth, for young adults. And we're planning our youth summer program. We want these youth to learn. We want them to grow in their spiritual practices. We're going to have worship and Bible study. And we also want them to grow in entrepreneurship and gaining a work ethic. And we want them to really have these things ground into them. We want them embedded. And service is a part of that. We want them to give back. And so I'm looking for service projects for them. What am I looking for? I want my people, my young adults, my youth, to grow through service and sacrifice. I want their spiritual lives to grow. I want to teach them compassion for others. I want that to be part of their experience. And I want my youth to be exposed to the needs of the world beyond their own selves. How many of you can relate to that when you're planning for your churches? You want those kinds of things. Those are all really good. But then I ask, who's the real beneficiary there? Who am I really trying to serve there? And it is our people. You can see, to get our people, my youth, to grow through service. I want my youth to have compassion for the poor. I want my youth to be exposed to the needs of the world. We need to be aware of that. When we're planning a ministry activity, a volunteer service, are we doing this for the benefit of our participants, or is this something for the community that we're serving? And it's okay. These are all good things. These are the things, when I go back and think about my experiences as a child, that's what made me who I am. But it's very important that we be aware of that. I can tell you honestly, as someone who ministers in an impoverished community, who relies on the donations and support of other churches and individuals, when someone comes and says, "We have this great idea, we want to do this great volunteer service and thing in your community," sometimes I'm nervous to speak really freely because I'm worried about burning bridges with our supporting churches. I'm worried about how that's going to be received, and sometimes I'm not as honest as I really should be. And I don't always ask all the tough questions of groups. This is not a bad thing that we want to get our people, whoever your people are, your flock, engaged in service to the poor. That is not a bad thing. We just need to know what's the motivation at that point in time. Is this something to grow our folks, or is this something to do service and really benefit? So sometimes it's like that if we're growing our people. Other times we really do want to benefit the poor. And when we think about the poor, think about what is it we're really trying to address here. And there was a book that came out. How many of you have heard of When Helping Hurts? This book, it's a great book. I highly recommend it. And there's a quote from there, because we think about poverty, and we could think about lots of different things. What are we trying to address there? And we've got ideas, and you know, I believe it was President Johnson who declared war on poverty. And how long now has it been? And we still have that going on. And the World Bank conducted a study, and a few quotes from that study are in this book. And they asked, what do the poor say about themselves, about their condition? This is a quote from somebody in Moldova. For a poor person, everything is terrible. Illness, humiliation, shame. We are cripples. We are afraid of everything. We depend on everyone. No one needs us. We're like garbage that everyone wants to get rid of. It's tragic. More. During the past 2 years, we have not celebrated any holidays with others. We cannot afford to invite anyone to our house, and we feel uncomfortable visiting others without bringing a present. The lack of contact leaves one depressed, creates a constant feeling of unhappiness and a sense of low self-esteem. This is from somebody in Latvia. There's these quotes all around. And the consistent thing in these quotes is that there's this great deal of shame. That dignity has been stripped. And so when I thought about helping the poor, I immediately think of income. How can we get income to go up? It's all about that. When they actually went and talked to people who are living that existence out, it's so much about the indignity, how dignity has been stripped. This church here, my mother-in-law attends Second Baptist Church, and recently her mother had been in the hospital for some surgeries. My grandmother-in-law, I guess you could call her. And she commented about, that we had so many people from the church come and visit us, and they were just so nice, and it was one of the most pleasant hospital visits I've ever received. You've probably been on hospital visits that are awkward or received hospital visits that were awkward. And my mother-in-law says, our church did a whole training just on hospital visits. 30-minute training. Some of the things they said were, don't sit down. You sit down, people think, they're going to stay a long time and they're going to be here. Don't sit down. So don't stay longer than 10, maybe 15 minutes tops. And always offer to pray them. So they did this. Those are just some of the things she told me. They did a whole training on a 10-minute hospital visit. So I am not going to be able to cover in a 50-minute workshop everything about community development, but I want to start and give you some tools and get you set on a journey. But if it merits having a workshop on a 10-minute hospital visit, how much more in transforming communities and especially reaching impoverished neighborhoods and bringing transformation to those sorts of communities? How much more? When we look at poverty, we can think about a lot of different things. A lot of us think about lack of income. And so if you think it's a lack of material resources, the tool that you apply is you give material resources to the poor. If you think it's personal sins, if you feel like there's something there, the thing is to evangelize. If you feel like there is oppression in the situation, you work for social justice. If you feel like there's a lack of knowledge, you educate. Who thinks that the solution to poverty is educating the poor? Okay, who thinks it's working for social justice? Who thinks it's evangelizing and discipling the poor? Who thinks it's giving material resources to the poor? There you go. It's all of them. We don't just say, well, it's just this and we don't have to worry about anything else. We can just close our minds off to everything else. I just have to focus in on this, and that's all we have to do. It's not just educating the poor. It's not just working for social justice. It's not just a Bible study and a mental assent to the gospel. It's not just giving material resources. It's all of these. And that was true of the ministry of Jesus Christ. When he first announces his ministry, Luke 4, 18 and 19, he rolls out the scroll from Isaiah. And what does he say? He says, I've been called to preach the good news, to free the captives, to set the oppressed free. He talks about a spiritual and a physical reality of the gospel coming. And that should be true of our ministry as well. So how to really help the poor? So I want to unpack some of these things. I'm going to take this and move a little bit, if that's okay. So how do we do it? I was introduced to some concepts about this that I want to share with you. And one was this big overarching concept of the difference between betterment and development. Betterment is to change the circumstances, the immediate circumstances that a person's in. And it's usually temporary. So you've heard the phrase, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. What's the other half of it? Feed him for a lifetime. That's right. So betterment is that, what do I do to improve that condition right now today? Feed, now I'm not hungry anymore. I'm sleepy, I go take a nap and I'm better. Development is about building the capacity, the ability for a person or a community to care for themselves, to strengthen themselves. So when we think about that, and we think about our what's helping the poor, long term we want this development, because if you take a situation where development is needed and you apply a betterment strategy, what you're doing is not just a little bit less than what you could, it's actually destructive. This is another graph taken from the book When Helping Hurts. And it talks about people that come in, they're going along, and then all of a sudden a crisis hits. Tsunami, Hurricane Ike, these different things. It's real clear. Here was the situation, and then all of a sudden, crisis hits. When that happens, you need to bring relief. That's a form of betterment. You've got to stop the bleeding. People don't have clean water. They don't have access to it at all. You've got to bring clean water. You've got to do these things. Then you go to a rehabilitation where you get back to the way things were. So getting the roof fixed. The roof was working. It got hail damage. It got torn off. You fix the roof. You get back to where you are. Then from there, you need development. And that's about building the capacity of the neighborhood or the neighbors to care for themselves. And again, when you apply those principles of betterment, when a development situation is needed, it is more destructive. It's not just less effective, it's destructive to that community. When we go into those situations, one of the key things we need to do first is we need to listen. I was teaching young men and young women about getting jobs. I was teaching them about how to live out their gospel calling in the form of work and where that was needed. And we were trying to get these young men to really engage in faithfulness at work. Just trying, come on, Ken, why can't you, I got you this job, why are you leaving these jobs? And I was really frustrated because my first job, and I told them this, my first job was working for my dad. And I would, on weekends in the summer, I would go down to his business and they would take all the change from the cashier's drawer, from the soda machine, and they would just have a bucket of it. And my brother and I would sit there on the floor, right underneath my dad's desk, and we would sit there and count out pennies, dimes, nickels. The quarter actually had one of those rollers, that you could pour the money in and it counted it for you. You put the paper around it, and we got 10 cents per roll. And I'm thinking, you guys are making $8, $9, $10 an hour. We were counting out these pennies and making 10 cents a roll. Come on, you can do this. And I wasn't listening at all. And guys were quitting jobs, and they were just really frustrated and just having a bad attitude about it. And I thought, man, what's going on here? I thought, and so I wasn't listening at all. I stopped, I listened, and I asked the question. I said, Ken, you know, I hear these stories about guys being able to make money doing drugs, and in my mind, I'm thinking dealing drugs, and I thought, that's really overrated. It's such a high risk. You get locked up. And he said, Kirk, you don't understand. I have driven a brown paper bag, a little lunch bag, from one side of town to the other, gotten $5,000 for it. And you want me to go work for $8 an hour, lifting furniture, dealing with cranky customers all day long. This is a big sacrifice. Totally changed my mindset. So I have to start with listening. If we want to help the poor, we've got to start with listening. I started praising. They finished 1 week of work. Way to go. That's awesome. That is awesome. Give me 5. Way to go. Keep it up. And I started supporting and talking, letting them vent their frustrations. Because to them, man, I could be doing something a lot different out here, making a lot more money, a lot easier. So I started that process of listening. We have to go into communities, go in and when we're ministering, and listen. We have to do that. Next thing about ministry, I want to talk about first dates. How many of you have ever been on a first date? Okay, so you know a little bit of what I'm talking about. Go on a first date. I'm thinking back to some of mine in high school, and we would, get dressed up. I'd actually brush my teeth and use mouthwash. I actually put some effort into it, so I looked probably the best I was ever going to look on that first date. Came in, we'd go out to dinner someplace. Chili's was probably about as much as I could afford then. But we'd go somewhere, we'd order dessert, we'd have this nice time, we'd chat, we'd do these different things. And when we came out of it, we had some new experiences, gotten to know each other a little bit. Not a real deep relationship. This is just a first date. There's no depth, no openness. There's not life change. A lot of our volunteer service when we want to do community transformation is like a first date. You go out, everybody's ready, excited, they got on a bright shirt, they got their little steak thing, they're cleaning up the park, they're doing things like that, new experiences, met some new people, but our lives and our relationships aren't changed. Continuing to do one-time projects over and over and over and over again is like being a serial first dater. There's no depth that grows there. You collect a lot of experiences and you can talk about a lot of neat places you've been, but transformation both ways for the community that you're visiting and in your own heart is very minimal. Lasting, long-term. The kind of transformation that we're hoping happens as a part of Loving Houston is not going to happen with a bunch of serial first dates. And so you got to commit. You got to commit. Like a marriage. How many people have been married here more than 20 years? How many more than 30 years? Anybody been married more than 40 years? Okay. I bet that relationship has changed your life immeasurably. My parents are coming up on their 40th anniversary. Their lives are totally different than what they were. They have had an incredible impact on each other. If we want to have that sort of transformational impact, we can't expect to have it on just a series of dates. We have to commit. So Agape was having this issue. We've been in existence for 8 years. We're having a lot of volunteers that wanted to come down and do a one-time project. And I understand that. You need a first date. You don't just jump into, unless you have an arranged marriage, you usually don't jump into an arranged marriage. Not in America, we don't usually do that. So we came up with this idea of these levels of volunteering. We had level 1, and that's a single event. It's usually a project. It's doing for somebody, usually doing for Agape. And these are good. It starts a relationship with Agape. You get to know who we are, what we're all about, what we're doing. An example of this, we've got an air hockey table right now that the youth use. The one leg is broken. We need somebody to come in and fix that leg, and we'd love to have a little ping pong inlay thing put on it so they could play that when they get bored of air hockey. That's a level 1 project for us. Great. It's like a first date. You kind of get to know who we are. The next step is a level 2 thing. That's a little bit different. This is usually a single event, but it's more program oriented. That's getting involved with our people. It could be a do for or it could be a do with. But it's usually with some of our neighbors now. You're going to get to interact with our people. The goal is a relational introduction to the neighborhood and to our neighbors. An example of this would be, that's our teen night, and they go do these outings once a month. So you might come and drive and chaperone. You get to have some conversation with the teens. And you might get to hear about their lives and get a little bit of taste. Maybe like a second date. You kind of get to know a little bit more. Not a lot of transformation goes on, but you take one step further in. You're getting to know and you're deciding, do I want to commit? The next thing is a level 3. This is a multi-day commitment. Sometimes people end up committing for years. It's doing with our neighbors and our staff. There's some exceptions to this, but the goal is to develop and deepen relationships with the neighbors. Example of this is Trey. And he's been coming for a little over 2 years to our youth activities. And this is at an event, but you can just see how these kids ran up. They had this bubble machine and they just hugged him. They practically tackled Trey because he has built this relationship with them and loves them. We need somebody to come in the teen ministry and be there each week or at least twice a month to facilitate some discussions, build relationships. These are all related to our teen ministry, all of them. From fixing up that air hockey table, coming on as a chaperone, or committing twice a month to something. The transformation happens here. I know people have to start in at the shallow end, but we hope everybody's wading in deeper. That's something. If you want to bring transformation to a particular community, you've got to commit and start to go deeper. Empowerment. That's another big thing. Now, my son is 10 years old, and we want him to grow up to be a capable young man who cares for himself and his family. So we're starting to give him chores. One of his chores is taking out the trash. And this is about how he thinks about it. Like, can I please not have to do this, Dad, again? But we're training him to do that, to take the trash out. He has to take it out tonight, Monday night, and then again on Thursday night and put it at the curb. I want him to get to where he does that without me even having to remind him, but right now I have to remind him. Yeah. Thank you. You can tell how young I am. You can tell how young I am and naive. The other thing I do is one of my chores is lunch duty. So I get up in the mornings, I make the lunches for our 3 kids that go to school. Well, the 2 older ones, I decided, this is a lot for me to do and then be ready to go for work. Okay, now you guys have to fill up your water bottles. If you want something to drink, it's on you. You don't do it, you don't get it. And that's what we do for our children. Some form of that we're doing for our kids to empower them, to give them the ability to care for their own needs. If we do that for our children, whom we dearly love, we have got to love our communities just as much to want the same kind of empowerment for them. We've got to want that. So we've got to figure out ways to build up the capacity of the neighborhoods and the neighbors to care for their own needs. It looks different, and every community is a little bit different, every situation is different, but it's a key principle to transforming those communities. So there's a guy that I talk to a lot in Atlanta who's been doing this a lot longer than me. So when I get in a jam, I ask him questions. And he's written a book and done lots of things. He gave me a couple of quotes that I try to keep in mind when we're planning our ministries. The first one was, never do for the poor what they have or could have the capacity to do for themselves. Never do for the poor what they have or could have the capacity to do for themselves. And in another workshop that he was giving, I don't think this is in any of his literature, but somebody was saying, but man, our kids are so poor, they can't pay for this. And he says, no one can pay for everything, but everybody can pay something. So this is how that works. So we used to do our field trip, our retreats for our young adults, 18 to 25-year-olds, most of whom come from very broken homes, haven't seen their father in years. Mother is usually on some form of assistance. They're not working. You get the picture. So they're not going to pay full price for the retreat. And honestly, Agape gets a discount from the retreat place. We don't pay full price. Because we're an inner city ministry, we get a little bit of a discount. But we say, okay, if this is your first time you're here for free. It's on us. But your second time, we're going to ask you to pay something. Pay $10 to go on a weekend-long retreat. So 2 nights and 5 meals, or I don't know, more, 5 meals they get. We feel like that's worth it. You could pay $10 for that. And if you can't, come up to us. We got plenty of things you could do around here to help fix up the ministry center, and we'll pay you that $10. That's not paying full price. We know that. If they wanted to go then back to that camp by themselves, they couldn't do that. But what they've learned is they have the capacity to work and contribute something, and it is of value. It's not a throwaway. It's of great value that they learn those things. So that's a big part. Whenever you're thinking about any of your ministry, any of the service that you're going to do, look for ways. How can I make this experience a little bit more empowering? In everything that I'm sharing today, do not go home and think, oh man, I'm doing it all wrong. I got to scrap all this and do it differently. You start with where you are. You say, what could we do in our youth ministry, in our soup kitchen, in our clothes closet, whatever it is, to make this a little bit more empowering? I got to take one step this year. What's one step I could take to make it a little bit more empowering? Begin to think along those terms in what you do. Another part of the empowering, tale of 2 Christmases for us. How many of you have done kind of an angel tree Christmas, adopt a family, something like that? So we'd heard about that, and we did that in our first year. Our very first program when we started was just young adults. We worked with 18 to 25-year-olds, discipleship, job readiness. And they were in their mentorship program, and the mentor said, would you like for us to do some kind of Christmas gift thing for some of for the people we're mentoring? I said, okay. Well, we did this angel tree thing. And they said, well, ask them what they want. Okay, all right, we'll ask everybody what they want. And when the lists came back, I was embarrassed. See this one young man whom I love dearly, and we are good friends, but his list had an Xbox 360 and games and an iPod, and the list went on, and I thought, man, I like to put some stuff on the list. You know, I like to get some of this stuff. And it was just a total disconnect. We did that, but the feeling was just a little bit off. Like, this is not exactly what we intended. This is not helping these young adults become healthy, independent, Christ-following adults to care for themselves and their own families. This is really just enabling them to keep being dependent. So that's what we did year 1. Year 2, we did an adult. We said, you know what? Buying your friends your own gifts. So the young adult group, we said, we're going to do white elephant. Well, we didn't draw names. They put a nice gift in, $10 to $20, put a gift in, and we're going to draw those. For the kids, we did the angel tree. Again, the next year then, we moved it, and we had the adults and the kids do white elephant. And so families kind of bought for each other. Then the next year we did no gifts for adults. The young adults wrapped those gifts for their kids, gifts that have been donated. Then we moved on to Secret Santa. But now what we do, taking all the way from that first time we did Angel Tree, now what we do, the kids, starting November 1, do different chores in the community. They visit a little senior center. They sing Christmas carols to them. They go do a trash pickup. They write cards to some of the elderly and the sick in the neighborhood. And so these kids are doing these chores, and we're telling them, you're going to earn a gift to be able to give to one of your other friends. Now, churches still do they take a card and they donate gifts to us so these kids can have these gifts to pick from. But they go into a room, and in the room there's all these gifts lined up, and they've got a name, Jacayla. And so they know they're going to pick out a gift for their friend Jacayla. So they go in there and they get really excited, and they take that, they wrap it up with the help of some volunteers, and then we have a Christmas party. And this is a picture of the Christmas party where they go and they take their gift from under the tree and they give it to their friend. They say, here, this is from me to you. So a couple of things happen there. One, they do get the joy of receiving. We have all been given great gifts. I'm not trying to take gifts away. They get that joy of receiving a new toy. It's wonderful. They also get the joy of giving. That's one of the things we're all trying to instill in our kids and in our churches. It's better to give than to receive. That's not less true for the poor. You go back to, remember that quote about the person, we don't have a gift to give at the holidays, so we don't feel like we can go. That's true of rich and poor. It's true in all circumstances. The other thing is they learn the value of work. Hey, when I work, I get to have the ability to do fun things like this and give to others. So we didn't start out doing it like this, but we made these gradual changes and moved towards something that would be just a little bit better, a little bit more empowering. And there's lots of stories of this. We're not the only ones. There's lots of stories of cool ways to do Christmas. The other thing I would say, don't give up. We all make mistakes. We did a vacation Bible school in an apartment complex right in our neighborhood. And we've been reaching out to this apartment complex just around the corner from us. We've been doing lots of things there. Most of our backyard Bible club kids come from there. But it's hard to get adults. Easy to get kids, hard to get adults. And we said, okay, how can we do this? Let's brainstorm. God, give us a creative idea. What do they like to do? Okay, the adults, they like to play dominoes, like to play cards. Okay, well, we'll have kind of a card game. During spring break, we're going to do a dominoes and spades tournament. So we're going to play spades and do this. Well, still, they might not want to come out, and we really want to be able to talk with them. We're going to have these 2 hours while one of our supporting churches is going to be running VBS for the kids. We need our staff to really be able to dig in. Well, everybody needs groceries. The winner's going to get a small amount of a gift card to the local HEB. I thought, oh, that's what we'll do. Big mistake. Some of you may already know how these things turn out. But I'm sitting there, and it's going along fine. They're kind of dealing the cards real quick, and then all of a sudden said, hey, you just took a card. And boom, it was on. People were up out of their chairs, nose to nose, yelling. And oh my goodness, what have I done? I have just created a firestorm right here. There's going to be something on the local news, urban minister shot as card dealer, And we committed to do this tournament over the whole VBS. I'm like, this is just day one. What in the world am I going to do? I said, okay, I'm the dealer now. No one else can deal, so I'm learning to be a card shark here and do. We got through that, but we made mistakes. We still, I've been doing this for 8 years, and other people have been doing it a lot longer. We still make mistakes. That's going to happen. Don't give up. And keep trying. Keep learning. So back to Luis. Luis, that gut check question. Am I just a project to you or a newsletter? Because we'd gotten close. I thought we'd gotten really close. I shared with him about, well, how do you make your money? Well, I have to write letters, and different people are supporting me to be here. And so I went away. I said, I don't know, Luis. And I went away and prayed, thought about it, talked to God. I said, what is going on here, God? And God kind of said, are you going to be okay if Luis doesn't become the youth pastor of the church? If he doesn't want to go into ministry? Well, he's just a normal guy. What if you don't get to play any role in his spiritual growth? What if somebody else is going to come along and do that? Are you okay with that? And I had to say, okay, I can be okay with that. And I thought about it. At this point, I knew I was leaving in 6 months. And I came back to Luis. I said, Luis, you're right. I've been treating you kind of like a project. I kind of wanted you as like a spiritual notch on my belt. Got Luis. And I said, you know what? I'm sorry. I gotta ask your forgiveness. And let's just be friends. You know what? I'm not gonna keep asking you about all this stuff. That's gonna be up to you and God. And let's just be friends. The next 6 months while I was in Bolivia, my last 6 months there, we had more deep conversations than ever before. He asked me more challenging things, and I asked him more challenging things than ever before because I was willing to let go. Luis is in heaven right now. About 2 years after I left, he was on an evangelistic trip. We were in the middle of nowhere. He went to the backside of the middle of nowhere, out into the jungle to preach the gospel with a group of people. And coming back, the truck flipped over, and he and the pastor both died, lost their lives because of that. And when I got that news, I just thought, thank you, God. for coming and intervening and using Luis to challenge me so that I could have those last 6 months to enjoy. And my life was changed. His life was changed, but my life was changed. We were both changed because of that. If you're not having those sorts of gut-level conversations in the communities that you're serving, you've got to commit, you've got to dig in a little deeper. You've got to apply some of these things so that you can have that richness. You can be challenged in your faith and be transformed. So what's at stake for us? I just had a lunch a couple of weeks ago with a guy who went to a vacation Bible school in the inner city of Houston 13 years ago. First time the guy's in the asphalt business. He's not in ministry at all. But he went down there, and day one was like, oh my goodness, I don't want to go back. And day 5, he said, oh my goodness, I can't wait to go back. But it was just a 1-week VBS. And he thought, man, I'm going to go back down there. He drove around in that neighborhood, saw some of the kids. They saw his truck, and they ran up and talked to him. 2 boys really got connected with. And over 13 years, he continued. He could go down there during lunch. He could drop in to see them. Poured into these 2 boys' lives. And now they're 18 and 19 years old. One of them graduated from Waltrip High School, was the quarterback, got a job. He now wants to go into construction, doing great and following the Lord. And they've had some incredible, he just told me about a couple of conversations where they both challenged each other. The asphalt guy's life will never be the same. The other guy is in jail. And he started breaking into homes. But he is the one, the asphalt guy is the one that he calls when he gets out and talks to. 13 years he worked to have this kind of impact. Imagine what it would be like if church members committed to a relationship for decades like that. Imagine the transformation in a community when you have committed decades into people's lives. The kinds of transformation, the kind of depth that can grow. And imagine if whole churches did that. If whole groups of people committed to 1 or 2 young people. And what if a church chose a community and said, we're going to try to focus in on 5th Ward. Or not just 5th Ward, between this block and this block. And that's where we're really going to reach out. And the pastor said to his congregation, I want you to invest, not in a bunch of work days, but what if you invested in 1 or 2 people and carried those relationships for decades? First of all, imagine about the transformation in that community, what would happen. Imagine the fewer numbers of violent deaths. Imagine how abortions would go down. Imagine how fathers would marry the mothers and stay committed. Imagine how generations and generations and generations would be changed if even a handful of those that were being discipled were transformed like that because of decades-long commitment. Then imagine that church that came into that community. Imagine how they would be changed. Imagine how your life would be changed if you committed to a relationship like that where somebody asked you some tough questions like you've never been asked before. Areas of your faith that your small group probably doesn't ask you. That your Sunday school teacher, that's probably not one of the topics that you guys hit. Imagine how your church will be changed. When that happens, I'll get myself tangled here. When that happens, I believe that we will see and taste some of Isaiah 58. Is this not the kind of fasting I have chosen? To loose the chains of injustice, to untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe him and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood, your own flesh and blood, no matter what color they are, no matter how much money they have? Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and He will say, "Here am I." If you do away with the yoke of oppression, with the pointing finger and malicious talk, and if you spend yourselves in behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like the noonday. The Lord will guide you always. He will satisfy your needs in a sun-scorched land like Houston, Texas in August, and will strengthen your frame. You will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. Your people will rebuild the ancient ruins and will raise up the age-old foundations, and you will be called repairer of broken walls, restorer of streets with dwellings. That's my hope. That's what I envision for our city. That's what I'd love to see happen. I thank you for your time. I have just 3 more slides. They're on those handouts, but this is a little cheat sheet, kind of a review. Don't keep having first dates. Make a commitment. Do not do for someone else what he can do for himself. Do seek to build the capacity of the poor. Do not assume you know. Go in and ask questions and listen. Do not respond immediately with money, but discern that relief, rehab, development phase. Do not give up after making mistakes, but keep trying and learning. These are some questions just to ask yourselves as you're planning your service and what you're doing. And then these